Welcome to Conspiracist.
Great to be here.
Today, we're taking a really focused look at a specific hypothesis. It's the idea that governments might have deliberately hidden evidence related to the ancient astronaut theory.
Right, the theory suggesting extraterrestrials visited Earth a long, long time ago and, well, nudged human civilization along.
Exactly. And our goal today isn't to, prove or disprove anything definitively ourselves.
No, absolutely not. We're here to objectively examine the claims and the reasoning behind those claims, sticking strictly to what our source materials present.
So a professional evaluation of the information available.
Precisely. And the sources we have are quite varied, aren't they?
They really are. We've got discussions from places like Reddit Ask Historians, documentaries, aliens, UFOs. Quite the range.
Yeah, and then articles from university news sites, anthropology sites like sapiens.org, Big Think, Psychology Today.
Plus some specific text excerpts provided to us. It definitely shows a wide spectrum of views.
From strong proponents to, well, very strong critics. It covers the whole gamut.
Okay, let's start with the core claims. The idea of actual ancient alien influence. Eric von Daniken comes up a lot here.
He does. His central argument, looking at sources like the Psychology Today piece, really hinges on interpreting ancient art.
Right. He sees things in carvings and paintings that he suggests look like air or space vehicles.
And non-human figures, maybe astronauts, even hints of advanced tech that seems out of place for the time period. That's the core of it.
He also points to similarities in art across cultures that were geographically isolated, doesn't he?
Yes, exactly. He argues that suggests some kind of common external origin, like his famous interpretation of Patikal the Great's sarcophagus lid at Palenque.
Instead of the Mayan view, the ruler in the world tree he sees.
An astronaut in a cockpit, which right away shows you the central issue here. Interpreting these ancient symbols is subjective, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a recurring theme. Now, what about that expedition he mentioned, Cueva de los Tallos in Ecuador? Our sources touch on that.
Ah, yes. The claims there were pretty wild. Huge tunnels, gold artifacts, strange statues, even a metal library.
All presented as potential evidence of, well, ancient alien activity.
But it's really crucial to note, the sources also highlight significant skepticism about those claims. There are reports of inconsistencies, embellishments.
So the reliability of that particular anecdotal evidence is questioned.
Heavily questioned. It underscores the need for verifiable proof when you're making such extraordinary claims, you know? The burden of proof is high.
It really is. It seems like a pattern. An intriguing claim surfaces, but then the corroborating evidence is debated or found lacking.
That tension is constant in this field. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary, rigorously verified evidence.
Okay, let's shift slightly. Another piece often brought up are those so-called helicopter hieroglyphs in Abydos, Egypt.
Right, those are frequently cited. Some interpretations see modern aircraft, helicopters, even submarines, I think.
But Egyptologists have a different take, don't they?
They generally do. The standard explanation involves layers of carvings. One set of hieroglyphs carved over another, maybe due to plaster falling off or recarving by a later pharaoh.
And over time, the combination creates shapes that just happen to resemble modern tech.
Exactly. It's often attributed to pareidolia, our brain's tendency to see familiar patterns in random shapes, like seeing faces in clouds.
So context is key. You can't just pull one image out and ignore the rest of the cultural or historical background.
Absolutely crucial. Without understanding the broader context, the art conventions, the religious beliefs, the language interpretations can go, well, pretty far afield. The Abydos glyphs have explanations within Egyptology that don't require aliens.
This leads us straight into the criticisms of the whole ancient astronaut idea. Our sources bring up several major points.
They do. There are accusations of factual errors in proponents' works, logical fallacies.
And a recurring one seems to be this charge of European ethnocentrism.
Yes. The argument there, presented strongly in sources like the sapiens.org article, is that attributing major achievements of non-European ancient cultures, like the pyramids, for instance, to aliens, essentially diminishes the ingenuity and capabilities of those actual people.
Kind of implies they couldn't have possibly done it themselves.
That's the implication, according to critics. And the Sapiens piece argues this can even feed into harmful ideologies by denying or reattributing the heritage of certain groups, particularly BIPOC communities.
Reattributing their achievements to aliens or mythical lost continents instead of acknowledging your ancestors' skills.
Right. It touches on the potential for bias when we look at the past. There's a risk of underestimating ancient people's knowledge of engineering, math, astronomy.
Assuming they needed outside help for things like Stonehenge or the pyramids.
Exactly. And that Reddit thread on Ask Historians asking about solid evidence, it really brings this point home.
Yeah, people there seemed genuinely offended by the suggestion that their ancestors weren't capable of these feats.
And they point out, correctly, that we do have evidence for sophisticated ancient technology and planning. Someone even mentioned modern experiments showing how things like Stonehenge could have been built using levers and contemporary know-how.
So the argument is, why jump to aliens when plausible, human-based explanations exist, even if we don't know every single detail?
It's Occam's razor, in a way. Favor the simplest explanation consistent with the evidence. Filling gaps in our knowledge with, frankly, unsubstantiated claims about aliens raises serious methodological questions.
And ethical ones, too, if it diminishes cultural achievements.
Definitely. Now, on the other side, some sources, like those text excerpts we have, bring up figures like the Anunnaki.
From Mesopotamian traditions, right, linking them to places like Mount Hermon, maybe even the Nephilim from biblical texts.
Yes. And within the ancient astronaut framework, these figures are sometimes interpreted literally as extraterrestrial visitors who interacted with early humans.
But that's a specific interpretation, not mainstream scholarship.
Absolutely. It's one lens to view these myths and texts through. Comparative mythology finds parallels, sure, but linking them directly to physical aliens requires a big leap and evidence that just isn't there in a clear, unambiguous way. These texts have their own complex cultural and symbolic meanings.
One of the texts also mentions deciphered Proto-Sumerian signs, with translations suggesting advanced knowledge or divine contact.
Again, this falls into the category of interpretations used by some proponents, but translating ancient languages is incredibly complex.
And subject to debate among experts.
Very much so. Attaching specific alien meanings often goes beyond the scholarly consensus. There are usually alternative, more grounded linguistic interpretations.
It seems like a lot hinges on how you choose to read these ancient sources.
It really does. Which brings us to the cultural impact. Why is this idea so popular?
The Big Think article had an interesting take on shows like Ancient Aliens.
Ah, the fantasy fiction for atheists idea.
Yeah. The suggestion is that it offers pseudo-naturalistic explanations for things often described in religious texts. Miracles become alien tech, angels become astronauts.
So it might appeal to people who don't accept traditional religious explanations, but are still fascinated by these ancient mysteries and narratives.
That seems to be the argument.
Yeah.
It offers a grand alternative story about human origins.
And that taps into a deep human desire for answers about where we came from, doesn't it? Even if the evidence is shaky, the narrative can be powerful.
There was also a point raised on Reddit about production factors for these kinds of shows.
Right, that they might be, cheaper to produce than traditional documentaries requiring lots of original fieldwork or complex recreations.
Yeah, potentially relying more on existing footage, interviews, and speculative connections.
Which could explain their prevalence, perhaps, regardless of the scientific rigor.
And just briefly, touching on fiction, 2001, A Space Odyssey comes up.
The monolith. A classic fictional example of an alien artifact profoundly influencing human evolution.
It definitely resonates with the core themes of the ancient astronaut theory, outside intervention shaping our path.
But it's vital, of course, to keep that distinction clear. 2001 is brilliant science fiction exploring possibilities.
While the ancient astronaut theory makes claims about actual history, which demands a different standard of proof, empirical evidence.
Precisely. Fiction explores what if, history investigates what was, based on tangible evidence.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit. The core claims, the interpretations of art and texts.
The critiques focusing on evidence, methodology, and potential biases like ethnocentrism.
And the alternative explanations offered by mainstream archaeology, history, and Egyptology.
As well as thinking about why these ideas hold such cultural appeal, even through popular media and fiction.
It really seems the interpretation of evidence is the absolute crux of the matter. How you look at an artifact or a text.
Absolutely. And while the idea of ancient visitors is, let's face it, captivating,
the academic and scientific consensus leans heavily towards explanations rooted in human ingenuity and known historical contexts. The evidence for the alien hypothesis just isn't seen as strong enough by most experts.
The sources really highlight that gap between the popular theories and the scholarly view.
Which underlines the need for critical thinking when we encounter any extraordinary claim about the past.
Evaluating the evidence, considering alternative viewpoints, checking the context, it's all crucial.
A good reminder for any topic, really, but especially one like this that touches on such fundamental questions.
Indeed. It's about weighing the evidence carefully and understanding the complexities involved in reconstructing history.
Well, this has been a deep dive into the hypothesis surrounding potential government concealment and the ancient astronaut theory itself, based purely on our source analysis.
A complex topic with many layers of interpretation and debate.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.